data breaches, cyber attacks, information sabotage, and more have emerged as a result of the VUCA environment. It has become a necessity for BPOs to tame the loose ends and beef up their IT infrastructure in order to retain a solid grip in safeguarding client information. This workshop will focus on the best practices to follow in order to avoid any unexpected situations while preserving transparency within the organization and with clients. And with great delight, we welcome all our speakers. Mufti Faizul, AVP, Information Security Leader, IAM Security at Genpact. Welcome, sir. We welcome Harshit Baxi, Head, Internal Audit and Risk Management, Firstsource Solutions. A very warm welcome to Kumar Ravi, Chief Information Security Officer, Teleperformance India. Warm welcome to Rishi Rajpal, Vice President, Global Security, Concentrix. Allow me to welcome Rajnikant Singh, Global Vice President, Information Security Risk, Compliance, Controls, Data Privacy Audit and BCP, StarTech. We welcome Aditya Vardhan, AVP and Head, Cybersecurity and Risk, Quess Corp. Welcome Vivek Agarwal, Head of Chrome Enterprise India and ASEAN, Google. So without further ado, let me promptly welcome our moderator, Nitin Shah, Partner, Digital Consulting KPMG in India, to take over this discussion. So over to you, Mr. Shah.
Thank you, Dipti. And in a volatile environment, which was full of uncertainties coming in from various cybersecurity attacks, data breaches, identity thefts, ransomware attacks, and many more. The industry has emerged stronger after this crisis with a significant digital transformational shift. The transformation has resulted in industry to evolve its business and operational models from a people-centric to more skill and technology-centric approach, localized to distributed workforce, control-centric to cultural-centric view, and standardization to automation. The importance of people safety, flexible and collaborative work environment, and automation has never been realized as much earlier. While the pandemic had pushed the agenda of digital transformation across the industries and compelled the adoption of some of the emerging technologies such as cloud, zero trust, DevOps, it has also given us insufficient time to the organization to prepare for this change and define a robust cybersecurity framework for a secure adoption of these technologies. During the discussion today, we would like to discuss with our experts their views, their experiences of building a cyber secure digital transformation. During the discussion, we would like to discuss with our panelists their understanding of the challenges that the industry has gone through during the pandemic, some of the cybersecurity threats and breaches that the industry has experienced, and the learning they have got over the period of time, the opportunities that the industry is exposed to now through a robust cyber resilient environment that they have prepared, and also the kind of implications that the industry is going through with the changing cyber regulatory landscape globally, specifically coming in from the privacy regulations. So with this, let me turn towards Kumar Ravi, and I may ask him to share some of his views in terms of the immediate challenges which were posed by the pandemic and how the industry has adopted itself to those challenges. Kumar.
Sure. Thanks, Nitin. Nitin, just to confirm, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, great. Very rightly said. I think you've said the right context. I think we all have witnessed that the BPO industry has undergone a high degree of transformation in last couple of years in many aspects, and I'll restrict the discussion to the information security bit. So considering the importance of information security, I would say data privacy and associated compliances, I think one would have never thought of that this industry could actually, be running on the work from home, operating model. But contrary to the popular belief, when the pandemic hit, this industry was, the first one to adopt the work from home abroad, operating model, obviously, given, the pandemic situation. And like any other industry, BPOs were also not ready, to adopt the work from home situation that caught everyone by surprise. So this 360-degree, transformation of the business operating delivery model led to several challenges for the BPOs and the clients, and I think, to be solved for. So if I talk about the most concerning information security and privacy challenges, I would, probably go like this: that the foremost is the information security and privacy concerns by the client. So data security was already a primary concern for the clients, and with Wi-Fi coming into with work from home coming into the picture, the concern actually, grew multifold, and which was to be addressed with high level of assurance to the clients. The concerns were largely, I would say, addressed. They are addressed, and they are, still being addressed. And I would say through various technology, administrative, and people controls augmentation. Another challenge that was to be solved for was the secure enablement of work from home, because I think now people are moving out of the physical boundaries of the organizations. So I think that was something, the most important one, that what if people start working from home, what exposure they have. So I think various technological controls were kind of focused upon. Some there were like, new technology, I would say, innovations that are done. Some were already there, but they made, more popular. So something like in case of secure connectivity, the secure VPNs with multi-factor authentication actually became a norm. You would not find any, kind of remote access now without a multi-factor authentication. VDI solutions, they were already there. They become more and more popular because of, to ensure the data security. Endpoint security became all the more paramount, and solutions like EDR again became a must. And the posturing checks that before any endpoint connects to the organization, they are like kind of a mandatory controls now. Usage of BYOD was another one that was to be solved for. So I think these are the kind of challenges and the solutions that kind of augmented each other. Coming on to the privacy part, because some of the clients would go to the extent of being assured by the BPOs that work from home security is good. So I think remote employee monitoring solutions also kind of were adopted in certain bits and pieces in certain parts of the industry, I would say. But yeah, there was a challenge of privacy, that you are intruding into the privacy of the individual. So I think that was another challenge, but I think again being solved for. And most of the geographies actually allow remote employee monitoring. The other areas, in particularly for India, was the regulatory guidelines prior to work from home relaxations. I think BPO industry was not allowed to connect their office VPNs to the home infrastructure. DOT came forward and relaxed the I would say regulation around it. Although I think it has been revised to 1/3 the employees should be back in office. I think that I heard about it, but yeah, I think we are right now living in a hybrid model. So that was another challenge that was to be solved for, which I think was effectively dealt with. Increase in the cybersecurity incidents, I think, grew multifold, not only insider but outsiders also, because people are sitting at home now. There are like unrestricted environments. I think it gives more opportunity to the employees. Apart from that, if I talk about the outsider threat landscape, I think we saw more than 400% rise in the phishing incidents globally. So more cyber, I think, attacks also kind of, grew. So as security became more and more, focused, there was another area to be a challenge to be solved for, was the skilled manpower, shortage, I would say. It's really becoming difficult to kind of retain and hire resources, and I believe cross skilling and upskilling of the resources, I think it's not an optional today, but I think it has to be kind of also keep it as a strategy. I think these were pretty much largely, I would say, the challenges and how it's solved for. Apart from that, cloud adoption, use of collaboration platform are the other areas that really picked up a lot because of the pandemic situation, and they do have a bearing on the data security. And I would say that the industry has just made peace with the situation and adopted to it. However, future does hold a lot of lot of transformation that is yet to happen in the information security and cybersecurity space. So I would summarize by saying that the pandemic, as a good side effect, brought in a lot of maturity and discipline in the remote user enablement space, because that was the crux of the work from home and pandemic situation. And on-premise Kessel and model was already, it was maturing at a fair pace. But the remote task force secure enablement did see a remarkable, transformation, and that was the most important challenge to be solved for post-pandemic. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Ravi, for sharing your views. And I think you raised a couple of very interesting points, which will like to get into the details during the course of the discussion. But one of the interesting points which you mentioned about the employee monitoring, and I was hearing a term which I heard for the first time, which is we all are hearing about Internet of Things, but this is something on Internet of Behavior. So while you are monitoring your employees, and which is obviously is needed for the kind of business that we are all working in, but at the same time, it also exposes to some kind of privacy challenges, and that is something that needs to be dealt upon. But coming back to the topic, and I think there are a lot of changes that the industry has adopted, and those got fast tracked, as I mentioned, without sufficient time that all of us have got to cater to or identify the kind of exposure that we may get into. We also have seen a lot of security risk and the threats that industry got exposed to. So while we adopted some of the newer technology, but there were not adequate measures we got time to prepare ourselves for. So if I may ask Rishi, you in terms of the experience that you have faced or dealt with in terms of the cybersecurity risk and threats that industry got exposed to, while we all transformed ourselves from the on-site working to a remote working model.
Yeah, thanks, Nitin. So I think risks were already there. Nitin, what happened was our tolerance towards risk became really down. So while we felt very, very comfortable in a bricks and mortar environment, suddenly from one office and two office or 50 offices, the offices became 100,000, right? Or 50,000. How many employees are there? And you had so many offices to manage because your asset is lying there. So obviously, as Kumar covered, right? The phishing was on rise. So social engineering became a big vector to be exploited because the employee had no one to ask for, right? So in bricks and mortars, if somebody receives anything, the person may walk up to a supervisor or a TL or a manager, I've got something, is it legit or something, right? Plus, as we all know that targeted or spear phishing attacks will really prompt you to take an action immediately. So I think those attacks went on rise. So we had to guard against those. Our tolerance became low. So maybe in bricks and mortars, a normal tendency is when you receive an alert, you will raise a ticket with IT and IT will get onto the machine and work on it. The tolerance was when you receive an alert, you contain the machine immediately, right? And deal with it afterwards. So I don't think, risk from a COVID perspective may have risen. Risk is already there. Our tolerance really went low. And Nitin, I think I do want to touch upon your point, right? You bring in a very interesting aspect of monitoring the employees. And because we all took charge and took off technical controls, those physical controls, we all accepted that risk somehow, right? At the back of the mind that we will sign an NDA and people will not do what they're not supposed to do, right? So, and when it comes to physical monitoring, it has its own tricks, right? Because you can't usually use behavior as a word, right? It is strictly against the privacy. I think companies implemented that monitoring, but it has to be very explicit that monitoring for security, not monitoring for performance or not monitoring for anything else. And that message had to be very communicated clearly to the employees, followed by explicit consent. And it is not that you are forced to get monitored for security. Explicit consent followed by soft consents when you're being monitored. And also from a monitoring perspective, who is monitoring you, right? Is business monitoring you or is security monitoring you? Because business, if starts monitoring, people will have their own aspects to monitor, and somehow the performance will come into the picture because I'm a business, right? I need to get. But if security is monitoring, I think they have no other means just to look at security aspect. So those were some of the aspects looked at very, very closely while we implemented some of these monitoring technologies to make sure that we are compliant and we are doing right thing for the employees.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Rishi, for sharing your views. And I think I like your point saying that the tolerance level overall has come down. So while the risk exposure might still be the same or they might have evolved, but overall our tolerance, because we were not finding things completely in our control the way it used to be in a brick and mortar kind of a arrangement, that has come down. Also, what we also realized that because of the kind of uncertainties that we were getting in, even the board, the audit committees were also getting slightly more jittery about it in terms of what is happening and are we being informed at the right time in terms of if there's any kind of an exposure that happens to the organization. So maybe with that, Harshit, if I may turn towards you and take your views, how the expectation of the board has changed from the cybersecurity perspective over the last 2 years, and the kind of concerns that they are raising, and the kind of information, the communication that they are looking in forward. Because I hear a lot of such noise coming in from the senior management in terms of the change in expectations from the board.
True. No, it's very relevant. And just to take a one step back, I mean, saying that, pandemic is become a reference point. But one good thing which at least I'm convinced that, as far as Indian BPO industry is concerned, whether it's a pure play third party player, or it could be kind of, captive, or it could be kind of a JCC kind of a model. One paradigm shift which has already happened is to looking at cybersecurity not from a technical or technology risk, but it's a fairly strategic risk, right? And that paradigm shift has already happened kind of even before the pandemic. So I think overall board's interest and involvement in looking at kind of in cybersecurity risk was kind of in pretty much there, obviously at a different level of a maturity model, right? Now with that background, when pandemic hit, only that, board's kind of in concerns and the kind of an interest towards the cybersecurity risk has continued to kind of in further increase, right? So that's in a way from a purely risk management perspective, it's a good sign. It's a good sign. So I thought across the industry never was an issue during the pandemic to kind of getting a right kind of an attention from the board. Now with that background, specifically in the last 18 months, I am clearly seeing there are three broader aspects in which board's perspective is getting changing, or their expectations are significantly now increasing specifically towards the cybersecurity. One is a ecosystem perspective, right? So just to take a step back, at some point of time in an evolution, cybersecurity was focusing more towards the organization as an entity. Now in a connected world, everyone is kind of talking about the digital transformation, both internally within as well as your product and service offering to client. It's a really connected world. In that context, now board is really started raising concerns and also parallelly increasing the bar of expectation that, when you design your cybersecurity framework program, do keep downstream and upstream both the aspects together. So also, how much exposure you are likely to get in a new business environment from your third party, your service provider, more from a downstream perspective, as well as from upstream from a client perspective, right? Because by fundamental very nature of an BPO, basically you are essentially playing a some or bigger or smaller part in the whole value chain. So in that context, basically, yes, do connect with your client kind of a cybersecurity environment management, and is there any undue use with risk which is coming to your from either part of the ecosystem. So that's a one perspective and challenge and expectation which are emerging. Second, I think everyone has briefly touched upon is a purely internal perspective. So, while you basically now further strengthen your cybersecurity program, which is primarily built around drawing your periphery and build the controls around it, internally the landscape has changed, right? It's a completely distributed workforce. So in that context, basically, and as I think most of the people are opined, while continue to invest in your technology intervention tools and monitoring, boards is now linking it that that the best way and cybersecurity should approach even in a non-technical manner, which is by now start impacting culture. right? So no matter you might have a best of the technology or monitoring mechanism in place, eventually, if you have to adapt to hybrid work model as a kind of a permanent go forward strategy, somewhere that cultural element of building continuous engagement, awareness, and kind of raising a sense of responsibility, accountability to every last person is going to be important. And that's what I think the expectation from board is emerging. Cybersecurity should play a prominent role in that, obviously jointly with the business and HR and management. Third interesting perspective is generating. So far, I think I would say cybersecurity was still viewed at the board level from impact perspective, in the sense, what could be financial impact, what could be customer impact. Today, now, at least in a post-pandemic, now board is starting also to giving a lots of importance of cybersecurity from a reputational perspective, right? And which is another important that, while you continue to invest in the most sophisticated technology, kind of maybe based on the advanced monitoring mechanism, in terms of improving your ability to kind of either stop or prevent and identify. But what if incidents were to happen? So there are two ways to look at it. One is boards are now starting to realize and accept the fact that no matter whatever best environment or cybersecurity measure will build, eventually external environment is getting even more smarter. So we should be kind of ready to accept the incidences which are going to happen. It's not going to get nullified. But if incidents were to happen, how equipped and smart and kind of responsive enough to manage quickly that incidents, from a perspective of not letting it over or not spilling it over to a pure reputational impact. And that's where I think board is now started to kind of getting into kind of a very different perspective and new challenge, or so to say, interesting expectation which is getting emerged. So just to quickly summarize, those are the couple of kind of early signals where how board is now kind of looking both from an ecosystem perspective and slightly a different kind of an expectation, how internal and culture building perspective, and that okay, eventually we are in the business of taking some risk, but in case if that risk hits and realizes, how we allow it and restrict it to more financial or some kind of service delivery, smaller impact, and not let it slip to my reputational impact. Those are the three imperative or sign of perspective change towards cybersecurity is what my view is.
Sure. Thanks, Sajid, for sharing this. And I think important point you raised that this has actually given more kind of a strategic focus to the board and the organization. And rather than being more inside out view, it has also compelled the board to look at from the outside in view to see how are we prepared with respect to the external challenges. You can't be like 100% secured, but are we prepared to respond to some kind of these exposures or challenges which may come with the incident response framework that organizations are building in. But the other important thing which I have experienced is where, and you also mentioned board is becoming a bit concerned, is with the kind of requests which are coming in from the clients. Because certainly as our boards are getting concerned with the cybersecurity exposure, the clients are also getting equally concerned. And that is where I think I've also seen a lot of requests are coming into the to the organizations in terms of contract renegotiations and revalidation and putting a proper risk obligations in the contract. So that has made the entire contract compliance slightly more concerning. So if I may ask Kumar, if you have seen some kind of challenges coming in from the contract compliance perspective, clients are becoming slightly more rigid, stringent in terms of their monitoring, and or maybe requesting for some kind of contract renegotiations with the perceived, I would not say it's a real exposure increase, but perceived exposure which is coming in with the kind of challenge changes that we're doing.
Sure. Rightly said, Nitin. I think, with the work from home, definitely not only the organizations, BPO organization, but clients have definitely, become more paranoid and, more concerned about the security, because I think we all understand when you are in the controlled environment, in the B&M environment, rather than work from home, I think you have got a tighter security. At least physical security controls are something which are definitely, not very well present in the work from home environment, and you always try to compensate that. Our logical controls can, seamlessly be kind of, extrapolated even to the work from home environment. So I think definitely there was a more risk in that scenario. And that was definitely, like I said in my previous dialogue, that it was dealt with. So I think the clients were earlier completely against the work from home model. Like I said, you couldn't even think of it before the pandemic hit. But however, with the pandemic situation, in the absence of any other option, clients also agreed to this model of business delivery for the sake of business continuity. To that end, definitely additional information security addendums were formalized in the client contracts, agreeing to the work from home operating model with crisp security guidelines to be followed by the work from home employees. Like you said, a risk obligation to be clearly called out for. And so on and so forth. So I think, yes, there were definitely formal agreements that were definitely added to the contract. So, and I would say that compliance obligations, I would not say they have lessened or enhanced. I think compliance obligations stay over there. What you have to comply with, you have to comply today as well as a data processor. But yeah, there are workarounds that have been kind of stitched around to keep that compliance level up to the same level. That's how I see. And you're still, as a data processor, liable under your client contracts, GDPR, CCPAs, and the likes of these. However, with more work to be done now to keep the information safe while it is being processed outside your delivery center's boundaries, and to ensure compliance for the client contracts.
Sure. Thanks, Ravi, for sharing this. What has also been observed that because of enhancing these compliances, and as you rightly identified earlier, that people are becoming slightly more concerned because things are going out of their control the way it used to be when you were working on premise on the side. There's some additional security capabilities that the organizations are evaluating. So people are looking towards, as you rightly identified, user experience and behavior monitoring, going towards the EDR, putting up some kind of a zero trust deployment, passwordless security. So maybe if I can just ask you, Aditya, coming in from the global perspective, what are the kind of security capabilities that you believe organizations have adopted or are evaluating to enhance their cybersecurity posture and also to build the required level of comfort with the clients?
Sure, Nitin. Uh, so, Nitin, BPM industry has always been security sensitive, right? Dealing with sensitive customer information, taking care of the availability part of it, and we have seen. But I think this pandemic really changed the dynamics of it, right? Thinking of 30,000 seats moving away from few clean control sites to 30,000 endpoints, right? The users connecting from home, user connecting from shared office space, and so on, right? That has really put focus back on security. While customers were initially, right, they relaxed because of that pandemic situation and things were to get to motion as early as possible. Slowly, I think, zeroed down on what could be the additional security controls. And what we actually seen, being a BPO provider ourselves and being a consultant to a few of the entities, right? These security controls we have seen across 3 pointers, right? One is the tighten the existing security controls. The second thing is expedite few adoptions which were already there, and third, we have seen few new innovations as well. And all these capability build up have exactly happened across 3 layers: be it technology, people, and process. And from a technology standpoint, and I think my fellow panelists have emphasized on it, it will be more of a re-emphasizing on it. The endpoint has really come back to focus again. And we have seen, considering that the traditional antiviruses or the malware protection system have not been very useful, going to the EDR part of it, taken away the signature update on a regular basis, right? So EDR is one of the things what we have seen. The another thing what we have seen is around endpoint privilege management, because when the user used to raise a call within the office premise, obviously there was a support, but now we are seeing, because the support also need to be extended on work from home, those nodes, right? It's going to be difficult there, right? So the endpoint, the protection management part of it. The posture management has become very critical, right? How you assess who is getting into your environment has become very, very critical, including your the VPM or the multi-factor authentication. BYOD with VDI has definitely gained momentum further. And in the backend, it is basically supported by zero trust adoption. Interestingly, we are also seeing cyber and security convergence. We are seeing the offerings around video surveillance as a service, where the user's behavior, the facial expression, and so on have been captured. We are also seeing, considering these users coming in, we are seeing increasing adoption around privilege identity management part of it, not just for the end user part, but also for IT support part as well, because lots of IT support has also moved away from office to a remote work environment as well. And there's an increased focus on the threat detection part of it. And not just the logs part of SIM, but predominantly we are seeing adoption on the user behavioral analysis as well. So beyond this technology adoption, right, the second piece what we are seeing is around process. And I think one of the panelists already used that example, saying, you could identify an attack within 20 minutes, but if the response takes you another 2.5 hours, that entire purpose of having a robust detection program is gone. And the third one is on the capability buildup or the security consciousness on the end user has been, again, very, very critical in such a democratized environment. Right. So, Nitin, these are few of the initiatives on ground, what we are seeing on adoption. Obviously, there is a focus on creating a security framework so that there is it's unified, it's complex, and it's predictable. But apart from that, these are few of the initiatives which we have at least seen being adopted by these customers.
Sure, thanks, Aditya. And I think this is really interesting that this entire situation has actually progressed us or compelled us to adopt some of the technologies which you as identified were already planned, but I think they were pushed ahead on timelines. And I think there's another interesting observation that we've had, that while there's significant investments that organizations have made over the period, and hopefully as we all are coming out of pandemic, there is a huge set of opportunity that the industry has to leverage on those investments and create newer growth potential opportunities for us. And that is where, Vivek, if I may ask you, coming in from a slightly independent perspective, to share what are the opportunities you believe industry has after we all come out of the current situation that we all are in, and the amount of investment that we have already made. So what are the newer opportunities that we can look at? And going with the topic of the discussion, which is like kind of breaking the mold. So while the industry has already broken one of the mold in terms of enabling work from home rather than working on site, what are the other areas you believe industry will certainly push itself towards?
Hey, thank you, Nitin, and for all the esteemed panelists. I think the inputs are great, right? I think, see, one of the key themes that I always look at is, we continue to solve and evolve, right? We have to solve and continue to evolve, and that's the most important aspect of any business, any segment. If you look at, what we heard from the panelists, be it addendum from a security perspective with the customer, be it risk tolerance being managed and maintained, you have a technical solve and then you have a process solve, right? You solve some aspects via process, in which you have addendums with security with the customers. And then from a technical perspective, you start solving it by adding layers of technology or just transforming yourselves, like VDI with BYOD, or bringing in new tools and technologies. I think, going forward from the perspective of solve and evolve, we need to look at what are the investments we have made and look at how we have to transform that as well, because a significant amount of investment has been done for the infrastructure, for protecting the endpoint. And to Aditya's point, endpoint has become the focus, right? But at times, I constantly feel that, are we trying to secure a door that is not very secure, right? I'm just giving an analogy here. It's largely about having a door which is not secure natively, but you're adding locks and different mechanisms to make it more secure, be it antivirus, encryption, ADR, XDR, all of that, right? Vis-a-vis, can we just replace the lock or replace the complete door and put a more secure door out there, right? So I think that's where I think, from an investments perspective, while the team has continued to make investments and evolve, we've shown significant amount of resilience and sustenance, being able to get everybody working remotely, keeping the lights on, and not just from the perspective of business, but employee salaries, employment from a country perspective. A lot of things have happened in that segment. And now as we move forward, this is an area where we continue to evolve. And I think while we have been transforming all the way from the infrastructure down, time may be right to start looking at what is it which is your main gateway to your enterprise or environment or to your customer. And to Aditya's point, it goes back to focusing on the endpoint. Do we keep solving and kind of patching the endpoint, or do we just look at evolving it completely? And goes back to the whole aspect of continue to solve and evolve, because this is normal. This is here to stay. The Delta, the Omicrons, and any more that is to come is going to happen. And we've shown the world as an industry that remote working is completely possible. And with focus on employees and greater technologies that we have today, they can make it a lot more possible. So I would say, I think we have to continue to solve and evolve and keep making those changes. And that's where start to look at things from a fresh lens, because we've done what we had to do to bring it to where we are today, with hundreds of thousands of employees working from home, having their employment, generating billability for our organizations. But going forward, how do we make it more efficient? How do we make the employees more productive becomes key for all of us. So continue to solve and evolve is what I would say.
It's very interesting. I think solve and evolve. I'll just try to add two bits of from myself: solve, evolve, and maybe sustain and resolve. Because you certainly will not be able to reach a situation where you'll say, okay, I'm 100% secure. So as I think one of the finalists highlighted, the incident response is something which is really critical, and as you build capabilities to resolve and sustain, I think that certainly give us better opportunities. So with this, Faizul, I think if I can turn to you and maybe seek your views in terms of what are the top three opportunities in security areas which you believe the industry has spent a lot, have developed capabilities, but these are needed to have a more sustainable and resilient cybersecurity framework deployed across the organization.
Right. Thank you, Nitin. And I think this is the right time to kind of talk about this topic as we made the context, and then with all speakers making the right point about how we transformed during this time, and then how we evolved and made our businesses operate and then kind of translate into more business as well. I think we've made a heap of journey around digital transformation, innovations, and then driving business. But what is also critical at the same time is, have we made the basics right? Have we built our journey with all those building blocks correctly? The focus around an organization's ability to measure what's right and how we measure that efficacies around the deployment of different technologies, and not just technologies, but processes and the human side of it as well is critical. And that's how we kind of evolve towards building a right cybersecurity framework, or a resilient framework, I would say. I think some of the key areas, if I would touch upon, that has been focused and pre-pandemic and post-pandemic is become more relevant and more important, is about identifying all your crown jewels, and I think identifying your assets which are critical to business. I think that's the first important area which mostly all organizations always try to maintain, but now it's important because you cannot solve for everything at the same time, right? You need to make that journey. That's number one. So make sure that we identify what's critical to business and have a very cohesive relationship to what is important for business, and not just look from a technology perspective. The second piece would be around what protection is needed, and all fellow panelists talked about different technologies. Absolutely right. All of them fit in at different places. And then, as Vivek said, probably we may change having 5 technologies heaped up into one big technology, or the way we solve those problems is another way to look at it. And when we have this protection in place, probably the next step I would say would be the threat modeling. I think today it's become very important that we identify what are those risks to those critical key assets, right? To the infrastructure that is critical to business. So have we done the right modeling, threat modeling around it? Do we know what is the risk? Do we know where we have gaps? So let's look at from that lens as well, and identify what we've implemented. And I think Rishi highlighted earlier that we had to lower the guards, had to get down to a level where we say, okay, we have to run business, but we also have to lower our guards to an extent that we say it's fine for business to kind of accept that level of risk. But are we sure that what needs to happen after that? Are we sure how we can address those gaps if there are? And is it critical to business to maintain that gap now and then kind of address it later? So that's how kind of build that map, and then probably look at the recovery part of it as well. So once we have all of this in place, the last thing obviously would be the response and the recovery. So do we have that critical infrastructure? Do we have the response? Do we have the response in terms of actions to recover and let business run as usual, as normal during those cybersecurity incidents and attacks, the incident playbooks and all of that? And at the same time, also have the recovery strategy in place. What is the big transformation, I would say, which we have seen as an organization and the BPM industry has seen, is we've evolved from on-premise to cloud to SaaS providers. I think that has made a journey where ownerships have changed. And with those ownerships, we see, with private cloud and with SaaS providers, where is the ownership of that recovery? Where is the ownership of resilience? Who owns what needs to happen if there's an incident happening, right? If there's an operational disruption for an organization. I think this is a very important and very critical area where probably the focus hasn't been great at this point in time, because there are gray areas. There is ambiguity of who owns the responsibility. Probably clients and industries like us probably would say the ownership is with our service provider wherever we have, right? But that gray areas, I mean, we need to address, discuss, and I think as a journey we have been kind of focused to make that as part of the landscape of improvements. And this has to be continuous. It cannot be just one time and we solve for it. It is a continuous journey. So I just summarize that the focus is building the threat map for your critical areas, and then try to identify actions, remediations for those gaps, and then have a recovery strategy alongside business to make sure business runs without any issues.
Thanks, Faizul. And I think I'll just take two specific key takeaways from what you mentioned, two interesting points. One is, who is responsible? And I think as entire cybersecurity is becoming more kind of aligned to the complete value chain, you have like multiple stakeholders who are responsible to security, are not working in silos. And that is where I think the responsibility and accountability mapping is something really important. And the first point which you mentioned, Faizul, and I just said, see what has happened, organizations have done significant investments on their cybersecurity frameworks. But how do I prioritize? And we used to do the threat mapping, the risk assessments, but it is still becoming very difficult for us to evaluate what is the value of risk. And that is where I've seen there's a trend coming in where organizations are looking in for more kind of a risk quantification. So instead of just doing a subjective assessment to say that, okay, this is a high risk, but where the risk is and where has it impacted me and what is the value of that risk is something which is a next, I would say, leg of security assessments which is coming in. But I think this is a very interesting point, and we have discussed a lot on the technology part. But I just want to take some views of for a few in terms of how the regulatory landscape, the way it is changing, how it is kind of impacting the overall sector, and what are the kind of regulatory support or changes that you believe would gonna further support the growth of the sector. So for that, if I can just ask you, Harshit, what are the kind of challenges, if at all, there are challenges you believe are coming in for some of the newer regulations coming in from data localization perspective, privacy perspective, and the data governance perspective, and how is the industry is planning to cater to some of those requirements?
Oh, sure. I mean, very pertinent because, you are at the point of that inflection and it's really globally connected. Just to kind of take a step back in terms of the last big global kind of regulatory change, if it has happened, which has impacted the players across the kind of geography and sector, is what GDPR. Now, as far as Indian BPOs are concerned, they seems to have settled pretty well now with that fact in terms of incorporating their practices, responsibility, obligation, pricing, and all that. One immediate focus where Indian BPO should be kind of and obviously they all are kind of keeping an eye on that, is something happening locally in India, which is your own Data Protection Act, along with various data localization measures and initiative, right? Now, in my view, it is still little bit early stage, but what is expected to come, I think I'm seeing that, there are a couple of areas where Indian BPOs are going to get surely impacted. First is on an immediate basis, till the time industry reacts, understands, and settle, is going to throw open some kind of a regulatory arbitrage, right? So obviously, you have certain advantage, and being a global player, there are other geographical locations which basically allows a free data flow, free data transfer with a little bit less monitoring and less obligation. On a real competitive advantage relative basis, possibly Indian BPO will have an immediate impact to lose that kind of advantage, where or even if you are basically captive from a global strategic perspective, some other location maybe kind of prefer more from a regulatory arbitrage perspective. That's number one. Second, if you look at it, either at the slower pace or maybe bigger scale, but every BPO player is in any way cloud journey at the different stages, right? Now here one interesting development which is already started happening, that while any of the regulatory change is expected to anyway directly impact you in terms of your own strategy with respect to data storage, data transfer, associated cost, but more than that, it's going to even bigger way going to impact your service provider. So whether it's your Azure or your Google Cloud or maybe AWS, they will have a much bigger impact, right? So I think one of the thing in your cloud journey, there is going to be indirect impact which is going to transfer from your service provider, because either it is going to make their life a little bit more difficult, maybe it will impact their ability to kind of offer some of the things in a seamless manner to you, maybe it will increase the pricing of those relationships. So that's a second area of an impact. And third area of impact which usually follows after any regulatory change is your dispute management. Very clearly, like these are the kind of regulation which are going to evolve over a period of time. And the fact that you are a cross-border player, you are a multinational player, it's definitely going to kind of give an emergence to variety of kind of dispute which possibly Indian BPO companies have not factored so far. So how is you going to kind of manage those maybe within, how you are going to basically take help of an external expert in terms of managing those disputes. So just to kind of sum it up in one last kind of one real life example, which India can learn primarily what's happened maybe in the last about year or so in the US and specifically in the mortgage space, just because of some kind of a regulatory change which was in offing and kind of some kind of judiciary based interpretation. Suddenly you're seeing that people which is an end customer, right, they've started filing a suit against the kind of an individual mortgage companies, and this becomes an industry phenomenon. Right, so today, every player who is operating in US mortgage space and operating out of US, they are running a kind of a series of maybe 20, 25, 30 different suits which is filed on them just because of one regulatory interpretation, right? So I think it's a one small example, but how does that, something which is beyond our control, but that transfer into your own ability to manage those regulatory disputes? That's a third area I would say kind of, is going to be the impact to Indian BPO space as far as the home regulatory developments which are going to take shape.
Thank you, Harshit, and very pertinent points. I would have loved to discuss those more with you, but I think we are really short on time. So maybe, Vivek, this is not something which I planned for, but this is a hint that Harshit has given to me. So just one 10-second response from you, Vivek. Harshit mentioned that the service providers like yours will also get impacted significantly with all these kind of regulatory changes which are being coming in. So if I were to ask you some of the two specific asks, if you have this opportunity to ask the government of India from the regulatory perspective to provide some kind of a support, what are those two asks would be?
Hey, thank you, Nitin, and thank you for putting me in the spot. It's a very interesting point, but let me try and dodge that, because I think if I look at Harshit, Mufti, Rishi, Aditya, even Kumar, if you look at the analogy of the game of cricket, right? They're all batsmen on the crease, and there is this whole regulatory risk arbitrage with different kind of balls being thrown at them, and not just regional, not just in country, but global, like GDPR and from the US and the mortgage, right? I think as an industry, we've continued to evolve in that segment. And that's where I go back to my solve and evolve, because I think the perspective is that this is here to stay, right? And every country will have their own aspects of data localization, regulation, privacy, and constructs keep evolving. And we, as a provider of services, be it as an OEM or as a product provider or as a service provider, have to continue and evolve to manage that from a landscape perspective, because it's not a local phenomena anymore, right? It's a global phenomena. But then all these aspects of different regions and globes and different countries having their own perspectives, this has to be balanced into a track where we go back to the whole arbitrage kind of scenarios in terms of what we can and cannot. If you look at the way we have evolved from a Google perspective, there was a need for data center in the country, and now we've got 3 localized data centers in the country. So as technology just permits you to continue doing what you need to do, but we have to continually stay ahead of the curve and ensure that we're able to provide the right level of services to each other from an industry perspective or to our end customers as well. So that's how I would look at the whole aspect of just solve and evolve, and to your point, sustain and resolve as well, because that's how we continue to progress in our journey.
Sure. Thanks, Vivek, and sorry to put you in a spot, but I think you played it really well. So, so thank you very much. With that, I'd like to thank you all. I think we would like to continue for a bit more, but I think we are really short on time. So thank you very much for your time, and I think I'm really looking forward how this industry further evolves and build further opportunities with a better cyber secured digital transformation. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time.